Hello everyone, my name is Wayne Jones. As you may know, you should know, I'm the University Librarian here at Carleton. And a couple of weeks or months ago we started a series called Tell Me About Yourself. And we've interviewed a couple of people now, and I want to introduce you to our third interviewee, and that's Colin Harkness. Colin, as you may know, works here on the third floor. He works as the gifts coordinator in the Collection Development and Acquisitions Department, and has been here for how many years at Carleton?
At Carleton, I arrived here as a student in '87. I started working around '91 as a temp, became permanent in '98, and arrived in the library in 2002. So I've been at the library for 16 years.
When you say student in '87, do you mean student worker, or you were a student?
No, I was a student. I finished high school and been out in the field for a couple of years, and decided it was time to find some.
What were you studying?
History, for the most part. I did an undergraduate degree in history, sort of minoring in philosophy at the time, and then graduated from that and ended up working here as a student.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. Here's a career. I've been here for 31 years.
Wow.
As a student or as an employee, so it's pretty something else.
Funny how that happens, right?
You blink twice, and wives and houses and children and dogs and pets, and oh, look at that, job as well. So off to the races.
We were going to try to fit all the dogs and houses and pets in here, but we just couldn't manage. I just don't have a big enough studio, so that's the way it is. But tell me a bit about now you're gifts coordinator. That's a very sort of substantial and established position that you do here. What were a couple of the jobs at Carleton that led up, or even outside of Carleton, that led up to that?
Well, honestly, I would spend 10 years in the registrar's office before I came here. In fact, I worked in just about every registrar's office. Mostly in engineering for 6 years, but I worked in science, I worked in arts, or graduate of arts, and worked in PAM. So much of what I learned from outside of here. So when I was very young, I started wheeling and dealing in the book trade. I started buying books and selling them to Burl at Book Bazaar, who then sold it to John Wyatt. But it all changed one day when I was probably about 13 years old, and I walked in there with this book I bought at a garage sale for about 50 cents, and I asked her if she wanted to buy it from me, and she gave me $40. So that was back in 1978 or 1979.
Do you remember the book?
It was a book on Timbuktu. Oh. And it actually was one of the reasons why I ended up in Timbuktu was because that kind of changed my whole perspective about books. And she promised me that any time I had something that she wanted, she'd give me 50% of whatever it was worth. And it changed my whole perspective of books and the whole need to go out and canvass the city finding books that she didn't want to buy. I made a lot of mistakes. First edition romances really still don't have any value and never will. Oh. But you can learn this as you went along.
Did you make mistakes the other way, where you somehow gave up on things that turned out to be the first edition?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't know everything. I still don't really have a firm grasp on sort of law and other areas that just art books really leave me kind of just distracted and unable to find focus. But other areas you learn very quickly. You can look at a table of books and almost know which ones might be signed. You can just feel it, as mostly because you know who the authors are and you know who was signing when, and kind of sort of leaps out at you. So this information you just picked up over the course of 17 years or so, and found myself being interviewed by, or talking to Anita about it at one point, about this job and becoming sort of permanent in the gifts world. And partly was this long-standing connection to all the book dealers in Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto, and sifting through thousands upon thousands of books, looking for gems and trying to figure out what they were. So you sort of get a very general, broad knowledge of what's out there. So when I came here and helped Dorothy Rogers with the problems she was having, that led us to discovering that we should work together, and the rest of it became history.
And you mentioned Anita. I think you mean Anita Wee, who used to be the collections coordinator, collections person here.
She followed Dorothy Rogers, and I worked for Laurie for about 8 years as well, I guess at that point, as a gifts librarian. And all that came out of that experience that I had before, because all of a sudden I was the person who knew where to draw next when it came to books and books of value, and antiquarian books, but it also changed the paradigm for what gifts meant in the library. Because up to this point had been, they took what they could find, and it had been a fairly small endeavor, and much as Wayne discovered when he got here, it had grown from a few thousand books a year to 16,000 books a year plus. And that process is simply because all of a sudden we were taking a lot more, and me and the building was managing that and encouraging it.
Right. Because that's the thing about gifts of books. It's not like it's sort of this is a very facile and not quite accurate way to put it, but it's kind of like the difference between a gift of a beer and a gift of a puppy. A gift of a beer is a full thing you can have and fully enjoy without any consternation, but a puppy requires requirement, and maybe you don't have time to keep it, and all that sort of thing, right?
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because I was writing a letter of reference this week for one of my prior students, and it was exactly that issue about the fact that this requires maintenance and management, because a lot of the time we sit on collections for a year or longer. We get them, we play with them, some of them information gets resolved very quickly, some of it actually we have to wait for people to get back to us. What is the value of a book? Well, sometimes that requires an outside assessment. If that takes months, then that we have to wait for it. But you also need to be able to jump back into whatever the collection was as soon as the sort of information arrives and deal with it. So it does take management, and it takes massaging, and there will be many collections in the future. I'm sure I'll come to this office and ask you, can we proceed with this? And then I'll have to sort of throw a sales pitch because I want it, even though there's probably no expectation that I'm going to get a yes, but I'm still going to try, because that is part of the job, is selling what we're bringing in here.
Sure.
And then just managing how it might fit into ARC or how it might fit the department, so it's constant.
Yeah, and it's not also another thing. I think if people have not sort of worked in gifts or sort of thought about it through too much, it's certainly not a, well, I'll say this, it's certainly not a case of sitting at your desk either waiting for phone calls to come in with people saying, I want to offer you this, I want to offer you this. There's outreach, there's negotiation, there's meeting with people. Tell me a little bit about the aspects of those and how much you enjoy those kind of non-book, so to speak, aspects of it.
Well, the negotiation is always fun, because usually we're the buyer, and it's a buyer's market constantly, where we are the ones they want to give something to. So we always are sort of talking from a position of strength, though there are times, we're very eager to get something. Still, we have to be the ones to pull the trigger and say, yes, we're willing to take this, and that makes everybody else happy, because it takes a problem off their plates. I enjoy going and meeting donors a lot. You get an opportunity to see where they are. They love talking about their books, even if this is a private donor or even an institution. These are all very personal relationships, so that encourages me on a day-to-day basis. Paperwork sometimes is a little overwhelming, and I will say some collections are more entertaining than others. I still find thermodynamics a little cold. Math collections can leave me a little hollow because I don't really understand them.
Right.
However, you still work through the same process, and working and the passion that I put into the other side is the same, so you treat them all equally and find a common ground on the other side.
Just curious, just to pick up on what you're saying there, actually, about what research is involved. Let's just say, like math, for example, where you just say that that's not an area of expertise for you. How do you go about making decisions about, well, we're not keeping this, but we're keeping this?
I fortunately don't often have to make that decision by myself. I'm in consultation with the subject selectors, and they, in consultation with the departments, will help us make those decisions. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, well, it's the right author and it fits our collection, well, we don't have it, and the decision is simple. Philosophy, for example, is one area where we can accept a lot because we don't have a lot, and as long as they're credible, then we just move forward and accept it. Other areas take a little more shoehorning and trying to find the right fit. And then it's up to us to sell, once again, the departments why they should receive this. But they're easy, I think, to get along with. If it makes sense to them and it's academic and they can see why they need it for the research, they're usually very supportive, and we can then come back and help you find space for it.
Do you feel like overall, Carleton Library, do you feel we're in a position where, God, we've got tons of offers of gifts and gifts coming in, and how are we going to manage it? And it's been 3 months since I've got back to this donor, or are we more in a position where we're getting the precise ones we want, and in fact we make outreach to donors? Are we flooded with things, or are we just very selective and the stream is very calm?
It has changed a lot over the years, where we used to accept everything. And then we started having these conversations about how to reduce, I hesitate to say pedestrian material, but really it's what it is. It's material that we don't necessarily want, and it's material that doesn't, we have plenty of it already. I'm not looking for more copies of different authors who are it's already being said nicely by somebody else.
Right.
I find that our focus, our collections now are becoming a lot more focused. We're getting a lot more cold calls that are clear collections, not just someone emptying a general library, because we've also started saying no to most of that. So I think more and more we're starting to see a better quality of material, and so we're no longer receiving 15,000 books a year. We are still receiving constant calls about material and good material, as opposed to material that we then have to get rid of and discard. So I mean, our bottom line is we say no without a list, and if we do receive material we like, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And that kind of is now it. But I think the quality of the material has gone up a lot in the last 4 or 5 years.
And you just quickly went past that, but what you just mentioned about without a list. A list is a very, ideally what we want is an inventory collection.
Absolutely, because we can make then decisions about what we'll receive before we get it. Now, I do make exceptions to that. Poetry on occasion, I will take whatever it is. It's usually 2 or 3 boxes, and then it's just as easy to go through it very quickly. And
right.
Because we have a very focused Canadiana collection, if we don't have it, it's going to get added no matter what. So it's a lot easier to make a decision there. And I mentioned physics is another area where I'm a lot more likely just to take a collection and deal with it, because it's not going to be thousands of books, it's going to be 50 books.
Right.
The big collections we have to say no to until we've got a much better idea what's in it, and can then move forward with only the areas that we're actually interested in taking.
Yeah.
Space, time, and money are all the issues associated with that.
And I just want to talk a little bit about the bigger collections, because I know just a couple of weeks, about a month ago, I think I was contacted by a donor. She has a collection in Brantford. It needs to be looked at. We generally, even the role that I play here, I'll often pre-warn donors that we can't take everything, and we have a team that can sort of travel and look at it. Say a little bit about that, about how that operates, where it doesn't have to be Brantford, it could be anywhere, where someone has a collection, they collected books over a period of years, they have 5,000 books or whatever. What you do when you get there, like what are the logistics there?
There's a couple of issues. So if we were offered a collection of about 4,000 books, about 60 kilometers outside of Ottawa, between here and Montreal. 4,000 books in German, mostly philosophy, just after we canceled the German department. And it was really, and the woman was up from New York, her parents had passed away, and she's now stuck dealing with this colossal nightmare. So, and we had to say no. I would love to have gotten in there and found the good German books, but it would have taken me weeks, and I would have taken a couple of dozen books maybe. And that's the way it goes. I have to say no right off the bat. In most instances, people are pretty reasonable. It depends on probably their incapacities. If they're really elderly and there's no way they can write a list, I might still go and see the collection and sort of say, well, these are the areas that I like to focus on, but it's never going to be the whole thing. And then there are exceptions too where we've taken entire collections. We're working on George MacDonald's collection. He's the retired director of the museum across the river that Cardinal was responsible for building.
Right.
And he had about 4,000 books, and so we've taken all the books, but the reason we've actually taken all the books had a lot more to do with his personal files and his archival material. So we weighed the cost of the books versus what his archival material means, his connection to the city, his connection to Cardinal, his connection to Indigenous studies on the West Coast, and figured, okay, well, there's something here that we actually have to pursue.
Yeah.
Though that is the exception, it's certainly not the rule. And my poor student has a hope that she'll be finished working on this by the time she's done with it. I'm not sure that she will. So.
But you touch on a good point there, Joe, about judgment, basically. We were talking about what you knew about Cardinal and the relation to the papers and all that sort of thing. It's not a case of simply saying, oh, it's 10,000 books, sorry, no. It's 4,000 books, sorry, no. It's 300 books, yeah, we can take that, we'll take all those. It's always a case of monitoring, judging, assessing, knowing a past history, knowing how to support something else.
And we're currently, this hasn't been brought to your attention yet, but we're working on another collection right now. We're about 50 to 100 books we've taken. They still have, I think, 4,500 titles. There is currently no way that we can use this as a research collection yet. But once we get to a point where we could get the departments on side, then we'll have a conversation about the rest of that material and see where we can go with it. But like I said, right now we're accepting 100 books out of 5,000 and calling it a day.
Yeah.
And those 100 books are beyond interest to us because they have small press poetry publishing from the U.S. and have a lot to do with the beats. And in fact, Charles Bukowski, who's in my argument would say that he's probably the first beat poet in the 20th century. So that has instant value to us and it's very exciting. This stuff, not yet, but I'm going to work on it. We'll see. We'll have that discussion in the future.
And the other thing too is about, I mean, we're in a, even if you set aside the whole idea of gifts for now, we're in a library here at Carleton where we're a comprehensive, medium-sized, very well-stocked library. We have well over 1 million books, monographs in the place, but we're not a place that collects everything or have the capacity or space to collect everything.
No.
And that ties in, I'm presuming, also with the gifts methodology as well.
Well, there are checks and
There's a
balances.
physical.
There are, absolutely, there are checks and balances, mostly because I'm a bibliophile. I'm interested in collectability. I like rare items. They speak to me on a level that is almost, it's an addiction, I'm sure, on many levels, and if not, certainly fetishistic. But there are things that get in my way of that. If there is no reason to have this book in the building because there's no ability to use it for teaching, then little voices of reason get in my way and say, well, we can't accept that. And eventually, after I've been told no 2 or 3 times, I actually start listening to it. Lloyd and I work very close together, very symbiotically when it comes to that, because he's very research-oriented, and it really is a great check to me because I'm not. My indifference to it sometimes is why we have to talk about these things before anything goes into their books room. Otherwise, I'd probably be heaving stuff in there that, is interesting, but really isn't going to just take up space. And that issue here is what needs to be focused on, because every different subject area has books of value. The key is to ferret them out and figure out what they are and accept those specific books without having to delve through all the things that, as a non-engineer, I may not see the value in, but the engineering group would be excited.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
every department has that same approach to it. So you have to be sort of open-minded and have the discussion, even if I don't necessarily understand the material in front of me. So unfortunately, we have a lot of people we can rely on
Yeah.
to help make my job easier.
It leads me to my first general rule. Don't just heave something into a rare books collection. I think that's,
Oh, no,
that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm learning. It's taken, 16 years, and I'm starting to understand now. It just takes 2 or 3 times.
How about the rare books collection? I think we don't have a gigantic collection like they have at U of T, but we have a focused in certain subject areas and a better than modest collection of rare materials here in the library.
I think everybody should take a walk through it, and if not, just feel some of the old titles in there. We have some incredibly old books. We have some fascinating things that are worth just taking off the shelf and looking at for a few minutes, particularly in your areas of interest. Lloyd took a book off the shelf yesterday from somewhere in the 18th century. It's an early science compendium in English, and which surprised me. And a lot of the stuff, of course, is in Latin or German or whatever country it came from. And I didn't know it was there, but I was so excited to see this because it's one of the areas where we don't have a lot of strength. Books are hard to come by; they're really expensive, and when you see one, you kind of want to grab it. So, I always discover new things when I'm up there, because you can't take everything off the shelves, and a lot of the stuff is fairly delicate, but I think it's worth going up and experiencing what we have. Because you're right, we're not like U of T. We don't have $1 billion endowment.
Yeah.
And that's okay for them. That's U of T. They're welcome to their little niche. But I think what we have is very special, and over the years we've been able to add to it through private donation, most of the time, occasionally through purchasing. One of the schemes we came up with to get rid of our discards when we stopped selling books was by giving them to the dealers who would take them.
Right.
And last year we picked up a book, a science title, that was probably about $2,500 for one book that was just accrued through books that we were going to discard anyways.
Yeah.
So very little time on my part, and
For sure.
making use of stuff that we were repurposing stuff we were getting rid of.
A good result. Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. And I definitely wasn't. We have a very sweet collection here. I definitely wasn't denigrating it at all. It was compare anything to what U of T has. It would be unfair.
No, I agree.
This kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, the other thing I'm interested in is the just sort of your sort of the future kind of thing. Like, where do you see the collection of? Do you see this as a continuing thing? Like 10 years from now, if you're still here, where
That's actually a great question, because I don't really have any plans to going anywhere.
I don't mean you personally. I'm
No,
just
but
thinking about books coming in at all, gifts being given at all.
But the whole thing is starting to change. I think books are going to continue, but the world of books is changing. People aren't collecting like they once did. The collections that we're seeing are a little more modern. To be honest, I think the people who I think there's lots of people out there who still have old books and really rare stuff. But what I'm seeing now, of course, is people are no longer building libraries in their own homes. They're not creating walls of books, because that sort of phase is sort of past. And with the bookstores going, the entire book market has changed in how we acquire books. Even personal reading has changed, where a lot of people now, like myself, carry an electronic reader. Why? Because pulp fiction isn't something I've ever really wanted to collect, and the rest of it, it takes up a lot of space, and it's heavy. If I ever do this again in a next lifetime, it won't be books, it'll be stamps. Carrying books around is heavy, it's hard on my back, it's worn out my knees, the whining could go on forever, but I think the passion of collecting might just continue. So 10 years from now, we could very well see a very different approach, where it's become even more focused, where we're dealing with collections that have withstood the test of time, and the other stuff, almost like chaff, is now blown away, and we're seeing very, very specific things that people are wanting to give us. I'm looking forward to that time, because I think it'll make for some very, very exciting collections.
I think that's a very astute compilation of it, or analysis of it. Just take an example. For example, I'm like you. I have a Kindle. I have I have about 350 books on my Kindle.
Yep.
I have about maybe 400 or 500 books in my home. So they're kind of competing things now. And I don't buy printed books anymore. I buy only books from my Kindle.
Yeah.
And one can just imagine a future where people end up with 5,000 books on their Kindle. But perhaps it means that the printed books, the monographs that they have in their collections will be the stuff that's been honed down, that's very valuable, either emotionally or financially or whatever, so that in a certain way there's a little less whittling or weeding to do.
Oh, absolutely. My personal collection, which at one point was very big, is now down to 2.5 bookcases.
Yes.
So a few years ago, I realized I needed space, and I had this room full of books. Every wall was covered with bookcases, and I thought, am I ever going to read this stuff? And why do I have it?
Right.
So obsessively over 20 years, I picked up everything that I thought was neat and squirreled it away. And realized, you know what, I need the room, and I don't think I'm ever going to use it. So I got rid of 99% of it.
Wow.
And
Impressive.
you know what, it's hard. And now the end tables are now starting to pile up. So once again, I have to think about what that actually means in the process. But I still am a collector. I still see books that I like. C.S. Lewis is one of the things that I actually aspire to collect, his entire run of books. Not necessarily first editions, but just make sure I have. And I'm not sure that I always enjoy reading them. But it's one of those things that's probably since The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe I became obsessed about. And now I'm still collecting that. So that'll be my focus. But this need to have everything that's unique. Or because I see a Margaret Atwood and it's signed.
Right.
Do I really need to have that copy anymore? I mean, I'm not sure I do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I necessarily enjoy Margaret Atwood that much. I need to have everything she's ever put on my bookcase. So I agree. I think at some point what we're going to see is a lot less books out there and a lot more focus, and I think that'll be better for all of us.
Yeah.
Just space and paper and everything else that goes into it.
And kind of focus, right?
Well, focus for us, because then when we want something, and someone brings us, if someone were to bring us an entire run of C.S. Lewis, I think we'd take it. I think we'd find room to replace every copy on our shelves, or just put the whole thing and put it up in art and be done with it and say, well, we have a complete run of early editions, and there it is, and we'll hold on to it.
Or it could go on one of your coffee tables, apparently.
Well, you're right, the coffee tables are a bit of an issue, but you know what, that's something, I was given a New Yorker cartoon by one of our donors years ago, and it's two women in a big library talking, and the woman's looking around saying, I don't think all these books are paying their way. And that's exactly where we kind of get to all the time, right? So I'm not supposed to bring books in unless they take books out, but many years ago when Christina and I moved out of our 2-bedroom apartment, I started piling up the books that I had squirreled away in this 2-bedroom apartment. I ended up with about 1,000. They were in cupboards, they were on the beds, they were under the couches, so I had about 50 boxes.
Right.
Now 50 boxes about this big that weigh 50 pounds. It's an awful lot of books just to have hidden in the apartment. No. So my obsessive nature has been clear for years when it comes to this. So.
But kudos to you for fighting back, as it were, and to be able to clear it like that, that's something.
Well, change is difficult, and I think that's one of the reasons why we meet donors, and they are so, I've had donors who actually have to touch every single book they give me, and back in the day when I was taking everything, and this might be a house that had 1,500 books in it, they didn't have to touch every single book, and it would take days.
Yeah.
And I don't really have that kind of patience.
No.
I mean, I tried, I've learned a lot, but dear God, there is a limit to how much I can take.
Yeah.
I had one old fellow who would fall asleep in between books, so he'd touch a book and then he'd pass out. And his daughter was there kind of waking him up, shifting him along, but we've often talked about the stories that have come out of our donors. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it falls under privacy, but as well, a lot of this doesn't have happy endings because they have passed away since then.
For sure.
Yet that one was particularly good on my part. It was a very long day.
I like the sleepy cadet.
He was probably about 90 and not in great health. Literally, he would nod off after touching each book. It was a long, long day.
That could take a long
It was
time.
only 2 boxes of books, but it did take about 4 hours. And he wanted to say goodbye to every single one of these pieces that he felt shown and connected to. And rarely in my life have I met people so obsessed about something as simple as this passion, but they are. And
Yeah.
I think, like I said many times, I think our connection to paperbacks and why some people can't go to electronics is it's a fetish. They really have this attachment to the smell and the feel and the glasses perched on the end of the nose. And it's like, oh boy, I get to expand the font until I can actually read as opposed to looking for my reading glasses.
one of the questions I've routinely asked people when I'm wherever I am at a conference or at a whatever, actually outside of a conference, I'm just talking to normal humans kind of thing. I will often ask them about whether they use a Kindle or whether they use print.
Yeah.
I would say, and it's not age dependent, it'll be either someone in their early 20s right to someone in their 80s. Almost all of them say, I love paper books. I like the feel of a paper book. I do as well, personally, but
Yes.
I love the practicality of a Kindle.
Oh, absolutely.
But I would say 90% of the people I talk to say, I love paper books. That's what I want.
I think people just need to look around at airports, on planes, on buses, on trains, on the local buses, waiting for buses, and people are no longer holding a paperback. They're now holding a device, whether it's their phone or their Kobo or their Kindle. Maybe they're listening to a book as opposed to even reading a book, because I've done lots of that recently, which I never thought was possible. And it really has changed.
So it's changing.
Yeah, and I think one has to come to grips with that. Now, I think the whole e-world, there's going to be a balance in that. But when it comes to day-to-day stuff, the stuff that we don't, I think it's just, like I said, airports, no one really carries a lot of paperbacks anymore. And when I've traveled, I've carried a lot of paperbacks to Cuba or wherever I'm going to just leave behind. I'm not even sure I can do that anymore because of the weight allowances. So I got dinged the last time I was there because I had 12 paperbacks in my carry-on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was too much.
There you go.
And I gave away my Kobo while I was down there. So. Have you also noticed, though, you brought this up about having all these, 1,500, 500 titles on our devices. Well, do we really have time to read that many books? Honestly, I used to read a book a day. Those days are long gone, and now I'm down to a book every week or so. So amortize that over how many years I might have left, and it's not really 1,000 books anymore. And we're starting to realize that maybe I've got 500 or 600 real books left in me.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just one of those obsessive things where I want to be surrounded by books. And if it can't be on my walls, it will certainly be in my Kobo. I think my Kobo has 700 or 800 books on it.
Right.
I can't read that many. I don't have time for it. But I'll try.
Well, Colin, if your obsession is, and your fetish, as you call it, is books, you're in the right place. So thanks for the interview.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Informative.
That was
Thank you
fun.
very much.